Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Joan, for the invitation, and The Economist for having me here at the event.
You're welcome.
It's a new phase, an interesting phase for the eurozone and also for Greece. It was already discussed in the previous session that the eurozone has surprised everyone, and it has even surprised The Economist, who was less optimistic a year ago, and we are moving in the right direction. I won't tease you anymore. The eurozone has had a very slow recovery, and we must be honest, when we entered the crisis, we were ill-prepared. We had built up risks in our countries, in the eurozone, many problems which were of a domestic nature. And Europe, for some time, was saying, but the crisis was caused by the US. It was caused by the banking system and the financial sector. It had nothing to do with us. And it took us much too long. We had to improvise. We had to build new institutions, strengthen our frameworks. We had to improvise in dealing with the banks. And if you look back at how we have managed the crisis, we've not done a great job. And that's the stern analysis that we need to make. But to be even more stern, to understand the crisis we had in Europe, we need to look at the years before 2008. Particularly the years after the introduction of the euro and the start of the crisis in 2008. In many of our countries, overcrediting took place in our economies, credit which was not put to good use, not invested in productive sectors of our economy, but to a large extent was invested in consumption or invested in low productive sectors, like the housing market in many of our countries. We allowed these risks of overcrediting, non-productive investments to build up, not putting in place macroprudential policies, not making sure that our banks were managing the risks well, and this is how we entered the crisis. So to understand the impact of what happened in Europe, we need to look very critical at how we managed the years before the crisis. And as I said, during the crisis, we had to improvise. A lot has happened. You know the expression, don't waste a good crisis? I don't think we have. I think that the monetary union, the eurozone, is in a much more solid place now than it was for years. We have put up new institutions, starting, of course, with emergency funds developing into the European Stability Mechanism. We've strengthened our frameworks, our fiscal framework, our macroeconomic imbalance procedures, given the Commission a stronger role. We have, as I said, late, but we have established the banking union, which in my mind was the crucial trigger for the recovery in the eurozone to finally start happening. At the start of the banking union in 2014, many of the banks went to markets, recapitalized, sometimes forced by the supervisor to recapitalize, and that was, for the first time throughout the eurozone, the start of an economic recovery. And we are in a much better place now than we were. And we are also politically in an interesting phase, and it's already been mentioned. President Macron has not only put forward an ambitious vision for France, but also an ambitious vision for Europe, challenging us to ask the question and to answer the question, how far does integration go? We must be careful. Some have said that the elections in France and in the Netherlands have shown that populism is being pushed back. I don't think that's true. Populism is still on the rise, and the extreme right is still on the rise in France, in the Netherlands, and in many other countries, and unfortunately also in Germany. So if we design next steps of further integration in Europe, we need to do it right. Why do I say that? Europe has been built, the EU has been built by big historic steps in the post-war period, taking some risks. So my only condition for further integration was, let's design it well, let's get it right this time, not introducing new risks. So what is to do? Of course, there are still lots of discussions going on about a Minister of Finance for the Eurozone and what would his role be, a fiscal capacity, and what would its function be. But there is a lot of work right in front of us that we need to do. First of all, I think we need to finish the banking union. This sounds like something you can quickly do. It's finishing something that is already done. There are still big choices to be made. I believe that a banking union can only be complete if there is a deposit insurance system, common, joint. The resolution fund still needs a backstop to install confidence that it will work and will function when a crisis occurs. We also need to deal with remaining problems and risks in bank balance sheets, as is being done at the moment in Italy. And I take the positive view. The Italians are now doing what should have been done perhaps years ago, but they're now doing it. They're going through their banks, recapitalizing, taking the right provisions, selling off portfolios of NPLs, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this approach they are taking immediately also shows in higher growth figures in Italy. So, finishing the banking union, dealing with the banks is one key element. Second key element in my mind is the capital markets union. The corporate sector in Europe is still very dependent on banking, bank financing. And the idea of the capital markets union is to make capital available through new markets, new channels to the corporate sector, which would also be crucial to make our economies more resilient. The fact that we were so dependent on the banking sector in Europe also made us very vulnerable when there was a banking crisis. We need to diversify the financial landscape in Europe, and it is ultimately a European project. Let's do it at a European level. I also think that there is a lot more potential growth to be gained from the internal market, which should be deepened and broadened, and certainly extended to the service sector. On top of that, we need to look at what we have now developed in the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism. It is a huge fund, one of the biggest financial funds, international financial institutions that we have, and it could be put to better use even. If we want to support countries in doing structural reforms, not just in crisis period, not just when they have lost access to financial markets, but also to prevent that situation, I think the ESM could play a role there. We could develop it into a European monetary fund, building on the experience that we now have. The experience we did not have at the start of the crisis, but we have that experience now. Let's make good use of it. And that means that we have a large and ambitious agenda ahead of us. So let me turn to some of the ideas for the further future. I think if we want a fiscal capacity for the Eurozone, we need to discuss further what its function is. If it's about supporting investment, I would rather look at the instruments at the European Investment Bank and the EFSI, the Juncker plan, how we can put that even to better use or expand on that idea. A European or Eurozone Minister of Finance, well, it would be great if my job was a permanent job, with a salary, of course, but we need to be more precise. Can you have a minister without a government? And if it's a government, what would its mandate be? Of course, it should be under the supervision of the European Parliament. I think that's the easy part. But we really need to realize that the member states of the Eurozone still have very strong powers, sovereignty at national level regarding their welfare state, their pension system, their educational expenditures. And I don't think we are ready yet to take that major step to lift those policy areas to European level. It requires convergence. And let me make a few remarks on that topic, and then I'll close. For a very long time, Europe was a convergence machine. The World Bank actually called it the convergence machine. And for many countries, becoming part of the EU meant the start of a period of increasing wealth, of convergence to a higher European standard of living. And we have lost that convergence mechanism. And my key goal for the next years would be to restart that convergence mechanism. Any step we take, any instrument we design, any budget we create needs to support the convergence drive, needs to support those countries that want to improve their competitiveness, want to improve how markets work, want to improve how effective the welfare state is for the people of the countries. Is that possible? Yes. It's crucial. If we want to take further steps in political terms or economic terms, further steps of integration, it needs to go hand in hand with convergence. It's impossible to design one approach for the eurozone, an effective approach, while the countries are developing in different directions. So that will be my key agenda item, to get the convergence machine back on the road. And I have a long list on my agenda of issues that we can deal with in the short term to do exactly that, rebuild convergence. I should say, because otherwise you will be disappointed, something about Greece and the program and where we are. Today I had a lot of conversations with your president, your prime minister, the minister of finance, the governor of the central bank on the situation in Greece. And I expressed my support and thanks to them for the cooperation that we've had in the last 2 years. We've gone through a very difficult period. I don't have to remind you, in the beginning of 2015, where we got very close to a crisis which would have been extremely damaging to Greece and also to the eurozone. And it's with the support of Jack Lew, and I want to thank him here for this cooperation, his support. He has always been involved, pushing us in the right direction, kicking some asses sometimes. And thank you very much, Jack, for your help. And with his support, we managed to get out of that crisis and to keep Greece in that eurozone family where it belongs. And I think that was, in historic terms, a major effort and a major result. Does it mean that we're out of the woods, that the problems are all gone? No. Does it mean that for many years to come there will be more reforms, more adjustments needed, more modernization? Absolutely. Do you have our commitment, eurozone commitment, that we will do it together and support Greece where necessary and where possible? Absolutely. Does that involve looking at debt? Yes. I don't think that the German elections will make much difference. That's my best guess today. I don't think it'll make a lot of difference because of the outcome of the result, but also because the German position is pretty solid throughout the German society and German politics. Their position is, and I can understand it, that you can only maintain a strong eurozone if everyone respects what has been agreed and what we commit to. On that basis, I would like to say we've also committed to help Greece with the debt. And so we will do that. We have already done it in 2012, when a major relief of debt already took place. We've done it again at the beginning of this year, when the ESM restructured the debt financing, again reducing the debt burden over the long term. And we will look at it again at the end of the program. The work for that will start the beginning of next year. We will design a mechanism to make sure that more debt relief will come in place over time, if needed. If the growth is disappointing, we will make sure that Greece is able to manage the debt burden annually. We're good for our promise, and we have again said to each other today that we will work very hard in the coming months to first finish the review, which needs to be done already in December. And then we go into the final phase of the program so that there is a clean exit, a full exit of the program in August next year. Our common goal, and we are fully aligned on this, is that Greece is once again independent financially and sovereign in its main decisions. So you have my commitment on that. Thank you very much.